Hello everyone, so this is part of fossil fuels competencies still, and we're still talking about the nature and origins of fossil fuels. Before I was rudely interrupted in the previous lecture video, my apologies by the way, by that sudden cutting off. The lecture software that I'm actually using to record this actually have a limit of 15 minutes because it's free. All right, so anyway, so we're talking about major elements, minor elements, and trace elements again. Remember that major element, the actual criteria for becoming a major element in coal is you have to be greater than 1%. This is around from 1% to 0.001%. Obviously, all of this is less than 0.001%. So again, major components of coal, we're now switching to coal, is this hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. Minor elements are sodium, magnesium, okay, all of the stuff and everything in blue, and this, okay, are trace elements. Now, everything that has an asterisk, so that means say like chlorine and selenium, nickel, all right, cobalt, cadmium, mercury, all of those are called HSP, which are hazardous, okay, particles, right? So they've been proven to be hazardous to health of humans and other living creatures, obviously. Right, so, and the reason why this is we have to understand, again, I think I already explained this previously, is coal comes from the ground, right? And so in the ground, you actually have all of these metals. FYI, a lot of these things are metals, and some non-metals as well. So that is the reason why again, we have some such bad things about things. I would like to switch gears just very quickly here and just clarify something that probably is lead, which is here. Okay, this lead obviously is also like a trace element in coal. You probably heard about unleaded fuel before. Now that has nothing to do with association. Okay, so gasoline, the reason why they use lead in gasoline is because lead is actually a useful metal in which you can bind gasoline fuel, and it makes like this process called knocking less likely, and it makes fuel burning a lot more efficient, but now they have discontinued the use of that in obviously in gasoline. But continuing on with coal. So that's coal. So there are 4 different types of coal. If you want to look at this one, you have peat. Again, know that coal comes from plants. Know that oil, okay, or petroleum and natural gas, okay, are actually come from oceanic or marine animals in this case. All right, marine creatures. So coal, what happens is this is again based upon compression and carbonization. As you can see, at the surface, it's actually called peat. It gets deeper, it's called lignite. Way deeper, it becomes anthracite. Anthracite has the highest content of carbon if you look at it. So this has the best efficiency. And lignite, okay, the first stage, okay, actually they call it the second stage. I don't consider this coal yet, okay, coal actually starts in this one. What happens is this is actually has only 30% carbon. Obviously, peat actually also has less than 30% carbon. And actually in some parts of the world, like Ireland, okay, Ireland and Scotland, you can actually still go through around peat, in this case, peat fields. And peat again actually happens to actually in this case occurs in mostly in bogs and marshes. And what you do is you can harvest it by cutting them out, drying them out, and then eventually burning them, like during the winter time for fuel. Okay, so again, as you can see, the higher the carbon content, the more heat. This is actually British thermal units per pound. The more heat is actually created. The lower the carbon content, the lower the, in this case, the heat is actually created. And heat, we're talking about energy content in this case. All right. So I hope that actually clarifies some nature and origin of coal, natural gas, and petroleum. Fossil fuels come from us, actually not us, but all living creatures. Okay, and it is just a byproduct of millions of years of compression and heat. So hypothetically speaking, we are actually fossil fuels are actually renewable if you have 600 millions of years to just wait around. Okay, so that's that. So we're gonna be talking about the second learning objective now, which is about the political, social, and economic factors of fossil fuel use. We already talked about the health effects, so I think that it's at this point we should already know the health effects of burning fossil fuels. So we're now just going to talk about a lot of other factors in this case. All right. So just to give you a big background here, and again, this is actually in your PowerPoint slides. And again, as usual, I encourage you to read your slides in its entirety before even viewing these lecture videos. So, what does fossil fuel? Why do we have such like high demand for fossil fuels? Well, when the era of flight came into play, all right, what happens was the fossil fuels are the only way that you can actually fuel airplanes. So that is actually where the big demand for fossil fuels. Because if you remember back in the steam engine days, a lot of the power that actually is used in actually the way that we actually travel around is actually done by coal. Okay, they shovel coal into steam locomotives, and that actually what powers it, right? But that actually is where the demand comes from. So obviously the combustion engine came into being, airplanes came into being. Now obviously we need to have gasoline. Okay, and by the way, gasoline is a misnomer. Okay, gasoline is actually primarily kerosene. Okay, different grades of kerosene and diesel fuel as well. So what happened is, like actually, we actually have a lot of petroleum. Everyone has seen that based on proven oil reserve. We can actually provide enough petroleum products to actually be self-sufficient in that actually in that actual category for many years, ever since the beginning of time. But the problem is, what happened is before the 1970s, there was this thing called Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This is actually primarily countries in the Middle East. So we're talking about Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, okay, like Oman, United Arab Emirates, okay, all of these countries. So what happens is the way they made us dependent on them is they actually dumped, okay, lots of gasoline, lots of crude oil into the market. And so since it was cheaper before the 1970s to actually get oil from the Middle East rather than pumping it out from the United States, uh, a lot of people in the United States didn't want to go into pumping oil business in the United States because again, it was cheaper to just get it from the Middle East. Well, obviously we became reliant on the Middle East for oil, and it just happened so that in 1973, Egypt actually and Syria invades Israel. Well, they really invaded Israel. They tried to invade Israel, and Israel basically gave them butt whooping. That's actually what happened, right? And in order to force a lot of the countries that was backing Israel at that point to back away from backing Israel, what what OPEC did was they basically cut off. All right, they basically cut off oil exports to the U.S. because we were obviously backing Israel in the 1970s, and obviously that created lines. Okay, in the power pump there was this big problems. Obviously, right? This is actually one of the reasons why I think why a president. I think it was. I don't even know who the president was. It Carter at that point? Okay, actually then failed in that. Basically failed in re-election in that case. Because of that, luckily for us, what happens is the United States says, okay, we cannot rely on the Middle East anymore for fuel, for fossil fuels. So in this case, oil exploration, okay, oil technologies, okay, basically the drive for us to actually get our own oil actually increased, and because of that, we actually have now been self-reliant on fossil fuel. In fact, we are now net exporters of fossil fuels. We now actually export crude oil, okay, as well as natural gas to a lot of our neighboring countries, especially Mexico. Just to give you a clue, still though, Canada still, in terms, if we want oil, Canada supplies most of our oil if we need to import any at this point. Because of this war in 1973 as well, we actually have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So we actually have 30 days worth of petroleum in Louisiana and Texas. So if a war breaks out, we still have 30 days worth of fuel to actually fuel our daily energy needs for 30 days. All right. So again, because of this OPEC embargo, we also try to make sure that just in case we need oil oil imports from that region, what we actually did is we became friendly with Saudi Arabia and Iran. All right, and actually this is the start of our relationship with Saudi Arabia. All right, and we now have military bases all over the Middle East, obviously, and that is actually why we are bogged down in a bunch of conflicts in that region as well. All right, so it was all about oil and it was all about money, and it still is about oil and it's still about money at this point. All right, so the politics of fossil fuels obviously is a lot of countries rely on the export and import of fossil fuels or fossil fuel derivatives. Okay, so China needs a lot of oil. China is, in this case, has bypassed us in gross domestic product. And what happened is we are, in terms of our conflict or of our trade wars right now currently going on with China, we have been kind of like pressuring a lot of our friends in the Middle East to basically jack up the price a little bit to make sure that the Chinese does not actually have enough energies. So there's always a lot of politics involved in this case. The other thing is Russia and Venezuela, as we know, we have problems with them currently. The second Cold War, I guess. And what's going on is we are affecting actually their economy directly by dumping, because now we're now net exporters of oil. We've been actually dumping cheap oil, and we've been encouraging OPEC to dump cheap oil. And what happens is it is Russia and Venezuela, because of that, do not have a lot of profit from actually exporting oil, because the price of a barrel of crude oil is so cheap that you have to have millions and millions and millions of barrels dumping into the actual export business to actually make a profit. All right, so there's obviously all of this politics of fossil fuels, right? And so we've been using that as leverage against a lot of our political opponents in the international realm. All right, so that's that. If you look at political lobbying by industry now, a lot of you might disagree with these numbers, okay? And I just got this from this Center for Responsive Politics in August of 2018. This is their most recent update. FYI, ladies and gentlemen, these are billions of dollars. This is not millions. These are billions of dollars. If you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at the sixth position is the oil and gas industry. So they have spent $2 billion. So that means they have lubricated political action committees for, and FYI, they just don't lobby one party. They lobby both parties. They lobby all branches of government. Okay, so if you want to know why a lot of our laws and regulations are loosened or tightened or whatever that would be, right? Again, what was that now? I already forgot the like Jerry Maguire, right? Show me the money, right? It's all about the money in this case. Money talks in our country, unluckily, and again, a lot of this industries actually spend a lot of money to keep politicians that we send to Washington D.C. Beholden, okay, to them instead of us. Okay, so that's just my little diatribe about politics, right? So it's all about the money in this case.